Extra milers who listened to the show this week on the Wednesday, the Extra Mile on the Wednesday, will already have heard the soothing sounds of early morning surf from one of my favourite places in the whole world, which I'll come to in a moment. I should make a picture first, though, shouldn't I? So let me grab the X Pro 1 that I'm using, and where shall we go? I've got a lovely... it's not quite as nice as the sunrise that we had yesterday, which was beautifully orange. Mind you, I was a bit earlier in the day, and I just caught it, just peeping above the horizon, and shining, beaming this beautiful path of light across the sea, all the way into the beach where I was stood. So not quite the same today, but all the same, we'll have a go. 2,000th of a second, f/5.6, 400 ISO. There we go. A sketchbooker to begin the day.
The Photowalk is brought to you by mpb.com. Quality used photo and video kit. Buy, sell, trade, create at mpb.com.
Can you smell it? What are you doing, Neil? The garlic, can you smell it? Oh, I did think there was something strange about you today, yes. It's at least 24 hours on, and I'm told I'm still very garlicky. Went to the garlic farm for lunch, which has become one of my other new favourite places in the world. Only found it actually last year on the retreat, and I've been back a good few times since. Yesterday we were ordering, and I inadvertently, note to self, don't make silly jokes when it's a busy lunchtime service. I inadvertently mentioned snails because I thought Jack would look horrified, which indeed he was. I didn't really order them, but the waitress thought I had. And so our starters arrived, wonderful Scotch egg that they do, and a sort of mixed platter of breads and things, and snails. And we all looked at each other. And initially I said, no, we didn't order the snails, and we sort of sent them on their way. And then it occurred that she might get in trouble because she'd made a mistake with the order or something. So we beckoned the snails back. The rest of the family were not eating them. So there they were, a platter of snails just for me. Now, I know some people are squeamish about snails. I think of them a little bit like mussels. And well, I tell you one thing they don't taste like. You know how people say, "Oh, it just tastes like chicken." They don't taste like chicken. They were suitably lavished with garlic. I would expect if you and I meet over the next week, perhaps month, I'll still smell of them. That's not the most pleasant start to a show you've had, Neil. Well, you know I like to share. On my list, then, of favourite places in the world, two of them are 2,710.7, the 0.7 is important, miles apart. The Isle of Wight, where I'm stood right now on the beach at Sandown, quite early in the morning, just photographing the sun coming up. And the Gambia, where the sun comes up every day. But I'm here in the Isle of Wight with family, and today we're talking about an expedition which won't involve family, but could involve you to the Gambia. All will be revealed. But I was trying to, I noted down a couple of thoughts this morning about why I love the Gambia so much. I wonder what it was. Is it the people? Because the people are very friendly. There is a reason that it's known as, is it the Sunshine Coast? Sunshine is in there. I'll get to it with Jason anyway. Is it the heat? I love the heat. It is one of those places, you open the door of the aircraft, you step out and poof, there it is. Is it the many smells? I'm also bound to say, is it the sound? Because the sounds wherever you go in the country are extraordinary. The wonderful sounds of the busy marketplaces, especially early in the morning. I don't know, perhaps you don't have to have a definitive reason. Perhaps it's just that some places, and Africa certainly does this, they seduce you. Maybe that's what it is. Africa seduced me. I met today's guest, Jason Florio, in the Gambia, and I was introduced to him by a very good friend of mine, Andy. And initially, the meeting that I had with Jason was to record an interview with him all about his experiences of 9/11. We've had an edition about that. Of course, we'll reference that during today's show. And then, we chatted more. We've talked about the many projects that he's had as a photojournalist, including the migrant crisis, Mediterranean. We've talked about more about Africa. We've talked about New York. We've talked about, it's a dog. I just got buzzed by a Doberman. Seems friendly enough. So we've talked about many things, actually, myself and Jason. The three of us, Andy, my friend for the film industry, and Jason, we've talked quite extensively over the last year about the possibility of having an expedition, about taking you to the place that the three of us love so much, the Gambia. So today is a very different experience, a very different kind of photo walk. There's no letters today. I'll save your letters for next week, and maybe some of those letters will be something to do with what you hear on today's show. And it's a show of two halves, as they might say in football land. So here's just a taste of what's coming up on today's Photo Walk.
Today on the Photo Walk,
Jason Florio on finding your photographic calling.
Suddenly we were meeting just these incredible people, whether it was sort of Salman Rushdie one day, Mother Teresa another day, kind of hanging out with the Rolling Stones up at Keith's house up in Connecticut, dancers, musicians. It really, I ignited something in me about working with kind of real people.
His love for one particular continent.
It's one of those, like I say, it's not one of those places. I mean, it's a vast experience of, on so many levels, and I think it's been probably my best teacher, I should think.
Really?
In so many ways. That's a book which one day I'll never write.
Stories of life told by photographers, and today a change to the norm as I go walking in forest and woodland just west of London and Chobham Common, the largest national nature reserve in the southeast of England, with a friend of this show now, a photographer, an adventurer, an explorer, a photojournalist, an award-winning Jason Florio, recognised for his work in New York for coverage of the events that unfolded on 9/11, his work at sea photographing the humanitarian crises unfolding in the Mediterranean, extensive photographic work in Africa, covering many stories of life, endeavour and resilience. It's a human story about finding adventures, more sliding doors this week, if you will, close shaves, and that love affair with a continent. Everyone is a photographer on this walk, whatever camera you use, and that includes the not-so-humble smartphone, as we say, because this is a show about how taking and making photos has you feel, what it does for us and others around us. It's you, it's me, it's Jason, and of course it's our other listener as well, on a walk together. And at last, I can begin to get excited about our first Photo Walk podcast African expedition in 2024. And with a little help from Jason and some musical scores to, transport us, today really is a call through to that figurative gate bound for Africa. So, walking boots on, a little jungle spray. Other brands are available, of course. Your own notebook of useful phrases in Mandinka, Wolof, Jolofonia, and at least 8 or 9 others. And I think checklist complete. Shall we walk?
This isn't a binary question of are you missing West Africa. It's more about how much are you missing West Africa as we walk in almost sub-zero temperatures. I have this thing about the cold.
Yeah, I'm sort of 1 foot here and 1 foot there, but I'm definitely missing it, kind of work-wise at the moment, because my whole focus has been in that region, and so coming back to the UK, I'm kind of here for for business and family reasons at the moment, but I feel a bit discombobulated. I'm not quite sure, photographically what I'm doing here. I've got my office and going through the archive, and I've been editing some short films that I was assigned from last year. So it's nice to be back here for sure, and I love just coming out and wandering in the woods. But definitely, it's been frustrating because I've had a number of assignments have come up, sod's law, in the last 6 weeks that I haven't been able to do, which is very frustrating.
Because you're here?
Because I'm here, yeah. But I am going in a week. I'm going to be going to Burkina Faso. So at least I'll get a bit of West Africa for about 10 days, which will be great.
What are you doing there?
It's a project for USAID. So it's an NGO project. And USAID, they fund a number of other sort of charitable organisations like, Save the Children, Mercy Corps. So I'm going to go and document some of their work out there.
Are the NGOs probably the best agency, as it were, for doing work like this now, because there's less work for photojournalists generally in the world?
I think there's work out there for sure. I think there's just a lot more people going for the same jobs. So I think positioning yourself is really essential. I mean, location-wise, I kind of got known for West Africa, and so I'm getting calls to go and work in West Africa. I'm not getting any calls to work in the UK. But as far as the NGOs, they've definitely been the bread and butter for us over the last few years, and so the skills I've taken from being a photojournalist or a documentary photographer, then those are definitely translatable directly to the work I'm doing with NGOs. As far as they're very much about everyone's doing storytelling. It's always about storytelling these days. Stills as well as video these days as well. So I've been asked to do a number of kind of little short films. So you're kind of having to wear two hats often in the field.
I asked a photographer recently, since you mention everybody's talking about the story, I said, do you think the story has been rather hijacked by Instagrammers making pictures of blueberry muffins?
I don't know. I've got to find another way of saying storytelling, because I do feel like it's like everyone's got a story to tell. Everyone's unwrapping something, or there's all these bits of lingo that people just seem to grab onto. And I think storytelling, unfortunately, has been hijacked by every Tom, Dick, and Harry. There's going to be a mechanic out there saying, his job's about storytelling through the vehicle or something. I don't know.
Yeah. Do you know, it's almost like you've had a Netflix series on my podcast. You've appeared a number of times and we've talked about a number of subjects. But I don't think I've ever asked you about your beginnings, where it started and why it started and how you became a photographer.
I was going to do Born in Shootbox in Middle Road. So I was born in Kingston, which is now part of Greater London. And spent my youth in Surrey, and where we are now. I'm back here, somehow circled back around, I thought I'd escaped. I escaped to Texas when I was about 22, and then, spent the nearly 20 years in New York, and somehow the road has looped back around, and I'm walking back in, kind of almost the same footsteps I was as a teenager.
But how did the photography start?
Photography was really something I only got into when I moved to Texas, and I was very fortunate to meet as a young guy there called Isaac Tyner. And Isaac was, I was sort of interested in photography, but I didn't really, think about how to pursue it as a career. And he told me he was a photo assistant. I said, what's that? And he goes, well, it's what it sounds like. And I said, that sounds great. I'd love to do that. The photographer that he was working for, a fantastic guy called Peter Robbins, who's, I'd say Peter he was the catalyst in all of this. If you're listening, Peter, this is a massive shout out to you. He's a good old boy from Oklahoma.
What way, this way?
Up this way, yeah. We'll wander up. We'll come right past Sheikh Mohammed's. This is all his stables up here with billions of dollars worth of horses. If you do see a little princess riding by on a horse, she's probably trying to escape There was one of his daughters did escape from here, and
Prime your cameras.
yeah, no, I've got it all ready. So yeah, actually,
This is why you brought me here. We've not come here to do a walk. You've come to do a story.
Well, there's one bit we will go through it. There's normally some like Nepalese Gurkhas in tents that are camped out. If Sheikh Mohammed's around, then they're sort of in these tents, and they get sort of, as grumpy as a Nepalese can get, which is not very grumpy, telling us you can't go through there or something. But I do, we got the right of passage here. So, but anyway, Peter Robbins was this Texas photographer. Isaac introduced me to him, as Isaac was going to move on to work for another photographer. And Peter said, we'll give you a go kind of thing. I said, look, I don't know anything. And so he sort of hands me a Hasselblad, which was even more frightening than just like a little, Olympus or whatever. And I think we had a lot of laughs with me trying to, load some Tri-X in there and stuff. And then I guess the biggest test was how to fold a circular reflector. But anyway, he was absolutely amazing. And on the sort of second day, he gave me the keys for the studio and said, look, if you are serious about this, then, it's not just about working for me. You need to come in, use the studio, learn stuff by yourself. And he was so generous. And he's an absolutely amazing photographer, specifically working kind of what's left of the Wild West. He's out there riding with what's kind of left of the real cowboys and ranchers. So through Peter, I started working as an assistant. Being a freelancer, I had to start working because Peter wasn't working all the time. So started meeting some of the local Dallas photographers who were mainly fashion focused or advertising. So there was a lot of work for like American Airlines and the big department stores and stuff. So spent a lot of time in the winter, especially going to Miami. So we'd sort of almost decamp Texas and go to Miami Beach where all the fashion stuff was happening. So it was great. It was a great life. It was a really nice sort of start. But I think I was always sort of intrigued by kind of something beyond this sort of the fashion and the money side of it. And I remember going, I was back in London and I went to the Victoria and Albert Museum, and there was Richard Avedon's American West exhibition was on. These incredible portraits of people kind of all around where I had, was living around sort of Texas and New Mexico, and it really resonated with me. And I remember I can't remember if I actually cried. I was so moved by it. Wow. I was like, this is kind of what I want to do. I need to do something that has got some sort of substance to it, but I had no idea.
Did you not feel the fashion had substance? Was it a bit, a bit sort of thin for you?
I enjoyed doing the fashion stuff, and no disrespect to anyone that I worked with. We had we went on amazing trips all over the place. Worked with an incredible bunch of people. It was really sort of very, almost like a big family. They would sort of go on the road, and it was, it was very enjoyable doing it for sure. But I think it sort of just got to a point where I thought, there's got to be something else that I can do to sort of kind of feed the soul in a certain respect. But I wasn't clear at all what that path was, really, until I moved to New York a few years later, because I still needed to still make money. I took an assisting position with a British photographer who was in New York, a guy called Max Verdukel. Max was pretty high up in his game at that point, doing very, very high-end fashion stuff. It was all Italian Vogue and Lomo Vogue, this kind of thing. But the best thing about working for him, he'd just got the contract pretty much to take over from Richard Avedon as the senior photographer at the New Yorker magazine, which... suddenly we were meeting just these incredible people, whether it was sort of Salman Rushdie one day, Mother Teresa another day, kind of hanging out with the Rolling Stones up at Keith's house up in Connecticut, dancers, musicians. It really, I sort of ignited something in me about working with kind of real people.
I'm not sure that those sound like real people to me.
Yeah, Mother
Where are you
Teresa,
this afternoon? I'm just hanging out with Mother Teresa. Just another good soul on the block of life.
Yeah, it was surreal. I mean, spending the weekend at Trump's down in Mar-a-Lago. This is obviously before he, completely went off the rails in Phnom Penh. So that was, and so during that time, I was still doing a bit of fashion stuff to make some money between doing gigs with Max.
Yeah.
But then what I was doing was taking the money and kind of trying to do my own projects. And it got to a point in 98 when I think Max and I were getting a little bit kind of burned out on each other. I mean, we were on the road a lot.
Yeah.
It was really intense. And so I said I could do with a few months just to do my own thing. And a friend of mine, well, a woman I'd met, an English woman I'd met on one of the jobs with Max in Hong Kong, said she was moving to Thailand to just be a freelance writer. So I said, "Oh, it'd be great. Maybe we can do something together." So I got on a plane, got to Thailand, and my friend Charlotte, the writer, so we did a couple of projects together, but within a couple of days I had been introduced through another assisting friend of mine, actually my friend Paolo, who was Annie Leibowitz's assistant, and he said, "Look, there's a Brazilian colleague or Brazilian friend of his that's basing out of Bangkok. You should meet with him. He's this real gonzo Brazilian journalist. He just works for the Estado de São Paulo, which was a big Brazilian paper." And so I met with Pepe, and it was sort of, he was just such an extraordinary human being, such a huge brain. And so he said, "Well, let's go do some stuff together." So we kind of went round Thailand together, shoot some stories, and then we went to Cambodia, went to Myanmar or Burma. And suddenly I felt, okay, I'm kind of getting into what I want to get into, working with journalists, working with writers. Yeah, so that was a sort of spark of that. And then went back to New York, broke. And then in 2000 or 1999, Pepe had called me and he said, "Look, we should get back on the road again. We've got to get on the Jihad Trail." I'm like, what the hell's the Jihad Trail?
My word.
So in August, the three of us got to the Pakistan-Afghan border and walked over with backpacks, and just there was a guy literally there was a chain across the road, dropped the train down, the guy just said, "Good luck." And that was it. So we had this insane trip through Taliban-controlled Afghanistan.
What a story. That's what you did Tuesday. What did you do Wednesday? My word. I tell you one thing that you did fail at, by the way, that I've noticed as I drew into your drive this morning. The being able to fold a round reflector, clearly you failed at, because I saw I knew I was at the right place.
In the window.
Because in the window I saw there's a big reflector. Yeah. I wonder who can't fold that up. No, so there was
been sat there for 20 years. So.
That one you failed at.
As we walked and talked, and I listened to Jason sharing the introduction to his professional photographic life. A wonderfully meandering story I hadn't heard before. Despite all the time that we spent together, I became very aware of his need to make and moreover tell stories about places less documented, firmly off the beaten trail, places that we wouldn't recognise in the context of our own lives perhaps. And as we talked further, the story of Chitty Chitty Bang Bang oddly and surprisingly came to mind as Jason's conversation took me, and by dint you too, over the border into Afghanistan during a time in modern history where the Taliban's grip on the country was changing life in all manner of ways. Now, in Ian Fleming's story about the magical flying car, written for his son Caspar, the main characters in the tale are transported to a place and time where the country's leaders have banished children. In one scene, the pilot of the flying car, along with his companion, young daughter and son, find themselves in a silenced town square, where every eye, squinting from behind firmly closed shutters, spies the visitors with concerned horror and disbelief. It soon becomes clear it's the children creating this air of suspicion, and before the guards from the nearby castle can arrive to take away the family seen arriving in their car from the air, they're ushered to the safety of a shop by a kindly toy shop owner. Why would you have a toy shop in a childless state? Jason's story now is about to take a photojournalist into a country that doesn't like photos, and in particular, photos of faces, any faces. The stock and trade for a photographer making pictures about people.
I'm not quite sure what this is. Warning barbed wire. But there is a way to get into it. Where?
Well,
this looks like we shouldn't be able to go into this bit, but we're able to.
This is Sheikh Mohammed's property, and this.
But it's also a footpath?
Because of thanks to English bylaws, I guess you can walk through here.
It's really funny because he's made it look like no entrance. And then right here, there's a gate.
Yeah, and
with a footpath sign.
Over there, there's a little tent.
Yeah.
And in that tent will be a Nepalese chap.
But it does say public footpath 65 to Long Cross Road. So this is his security detail we're about to walk through.
Normally they sort of pop out with radios and stuff. And they're really nice guys. They're just doing their job. So actually what we can do, we can walk along the fence line and then we'll pop out.
Along the fence line. I feel like I'm on one of your stories now.
Honestly, when they put these bloody fences up, I was, this was all open before, but obviously he's decided he doesn't really, he's trying to keep the place secure.
Actually, here's a tent.
Yeah, normally there's some body.
If I made a picture, I'd probably get in trouble, wouldn't I?
Yeah, that's how we do. Morning. Hey, very good. How are you? Good. A little bit chilly, or? Yeah. Okay.
Do you think with all his money he could build some nice little brick houses here?
I know, it's just...
some if he's going to... Don't give them tents, give them something warm.
Yeah, poor guys set out here. And I
bet they're here in the night time as well.
Yeah, oh no, they're going to be 24 hours. There's another one, we'll find another one.
Yeah, I've just seen him behind us radioing to his colleague.
Yeah. They normally just...
Florio's coming along. Anyway, so we were in our story... Are we good to walk along this bit? Yeah. In our story, we were in Pakistan.
Yes, I crossed into Pakistan with these Islamic Muslims who were going on a pilgrimage.
Yeah.
So I met with Pepe Escobar, which is a great name, by the way. So Pepe, the Brazilian journalist.
Pepe Escobar.
Pepe Escobar, yeah. And then Hawa Mehdi, who was our local Pakistani journalist. And it took about a month for the Taliban to give us a visa, which they finally graced us with. And it was just one of those sort of surreal moments. We just had sort of a couple of backpacks, and got to the border on the Khyber Pass, and we sort of signed the visitors book out. And that was it. We stepped into Taliban-controlled Afghanistan.
And this was 2000.
August 2000.
Things were starting to get, obviously, remembering the date and what it's approaching. Things were starting just to get a bit tricky.
Yeah, I mean, the crazy thing was, I had actually bought as a souvenir an Osama bin Laden T-shirt in the market in Peshawar.
Good Lord.
Kind of, as we were waiting around, I sort of picked up a few knickknacks, and it's this T-shirt. It said Osama bin Laden, world hero, and I thought it was just so kitschy. And bin Laden at that point was not a particular household name in any way. So it was just one of those sort of kitschy things that I like to pick up when I'm out and about.
Yeah.
It was my first experience of working in a difficult situation, I would say. Within the first few days, we'd got arrested by the Vice and Virtue Department, which was this sort of feared group of the Taliban that sort of went around making sure women were veiled properly and people weren't doing things they were doing. So, morning. Can we get through this way? Yeah. Okay. I think we'll have to climb over the fence. We can get over here. Okay. You see, they're all got their little radios and stuff. So.
He's a bit nervous about the microphone, I think, and my clipboard.
Yes.
Maybe he thinks I'm from English heritage.
So the journey in was really quite tricky because we had to get to Kabul before nightfall, which was quite a long drive kind of through the mountains.
And what story were you specifically working on at that time?
It was going to be Pepe is, I would say, he's a very gonzo journalist. So it was going to be, I think, a sort of a multi-piece story for the O Estado de São Paulo, the Brazilian paper he worked for. So we didn't have it was basically just sort of life under the Taliban, really. Yeah. And the fact that there was just very, very few journalists in there. I think Kate Clark from the BBC was there at that point. Right. But when we got there was no one else. We did go and see Kate Clark, actually. I think we were pretty much the only journalists in the country at that particular time. So the idea was to kind of do a bit of a road trip. Pepe's a big fan of sort of how can I put it, Americana, not of America as such by any means, but of a sort of Americana. So the idea of a road trip, kind of like an American-style road trip around Afghanistan.
This is not a road trip that I would recognise.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, we definitely weren't doing it in a convertible Mustang or anything.
No, or an RV.
Yeah, it was. We literally had like it was a little Toyota minivan, driven by a lovely old boy with a long beard. Right. So that when you're there, the Taliban are you couldn't really move without doing anything and without being kind of watched or followed and all of that. So our first sort of stop was to go to the famous football stadium where they had been doing executions. Not that we were looking for that, but there was a football match on, so we thought, that's a fairly kind of a neutral thing that we can go and observe. Yeah. But prior to that, we'd been with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and they basically said, we're very happy for you to be here, and you can kind of see what you want, type of thing, but you can't make any pictures of anything living. So no human beings. Good you can take pictures of buildings, the flowers, all this kind of stuff. During that time, the Taliban were it's not Taliban 2.0 as now, which is just, I thought there was going to be some changes, but obviously not too many. But back then it was very much no picturing of anything that's living. Right. So even at the what was left of the Intercon Hotel where we were staying, they had a bookshop, and even the faces on kids' like books were scratched out.
Oh, Lord.
I remember specifically there was one with some like farm animals, and all the farm animals had like black marker pens over their faces.
Why?
I guess under their interpretation of Islam, that nothing living should be depicted. It's almost like you're giving reverence to it. That's why obviously in mosques there's no pictures of Muhammad or...
Right, yeah.
So I said, okay, we'll work our way around it.
I'd never heard this before.
Yeah. And which is strange now, because you look at the Taliban and they love having their pictures taken.
Well, now I've spoken to photojournalists who have been essentially route marched around to make photographs of people.
Yeah, and back then it was an absolute no go. And we'd gone to an area in Kabul that was which was the Hazara ethnic group, who the Taliban had a particular kind of beef against. We got invited. What happened was, we were at an old mosque, and a guy said, "Would you like to buy a guidebook?" And he had this like 1970s guidebook, and he wanted like, I don't know, $50 for it or something. I said, I'm sorry, it's lovely, but anyway, he said, well, do you want to come in for a cup of tea, which is sort of the
$60.
yeah, you can, and you can meet my sisters. And I was like, okay, this is getting a bit weird. No. But the guy is pretty educated. He's got these three young sisters that he was caring for. They're all been kicked out of school.
Oh my word!
And so Pepe did a video interview with them. I did a portrait, which is one of my most favourite portraits I've ever done. We call it the Three Graces. They were sort of there in their burqas. Yeah. And on the wall behind them was a clock with the time it was completely wrong on it. Actually, the clock is turned sideways. Right. And there's also a picture of a beautiful, fluffy white kitten, which again, sort of distortion of time with the Taliban. It felt like you'd gone back 1,000 years. And the fact that they had still got this very innocent picture of a cat, but would be completely illegal to have if the Taliban walked in there. It was one of those things where it's like, we've been invited in, so we got
what goes on in the house stays in the house, right? Yeah.
So we had that, and I thought we got something really good out of that. You had these people talking, specifically the young girls, about their restrictions to education, and also the persecution of the Taliban against this one particular ethnic group. So we got a lot in one little story. And then I think it was the next day we went to the football stadium. There was going to be a football match.
There would not have been a sports journalist, a photojournalist there.
Yeah, no. And so we were...
Or cameras?
No, obviously no cameras.
No TV
at all.
cameras.
No coverage of it.
No coverage, no.
So we were sat with some young guys who were, I guess they were, the Taliban don't wear uniforms.
No.
Yeah, these are just young guys in their shalwar kameezes, hanging out, got their guns over their shoulders, and they were super friendly. Like young guys watching the football, and they're like, oh, and I had my Contax G2, so it was all only shooting film, obviously back then. And the guy said, so basically take pictures. I'm like, I was trying to explain to him that we were told we shouldn't take pictures, especially in such a public place. Anyway, of course, I picked the camera up. And I make a few sort of just snaps of the game. And next minute, the Vice and Virtue, who are this sort of feared part of the Taliban, I think they were. It's imported almost from Iran. It's like this sort of protection of Vice. I got it around the wrong way.
Protection of Virtue.
It's something against Vice and the Protection of Virtue Department.
Yeah.
And so next minute we're getting frog march out through the stadium. Oh. And at that point there was a break in the match, and the players came down, and it was a sort of a fight between the Vice and Virtue Department, the young soldiers, and the football players, sort of trying to sort of help us without being dragged off by the Vice and Virtue guys. So we were getting frog marched out the back of the stadium by the Vice and Virtue Department, and next minute we're getting bundled into the back of their pickup truck.
Oh my word.
At that point, I was sort of... It was frightening, but at the same time, it's like, okay, it's not a big deal. We haven't really done anything that wrong. But anyway, as I sat in the back, I thought the best thing I can do is rewind the film out the camera. And of course, clonk, makes a load of noise. They grabbed the camera from me, take us off to the Vice and Virtue HQ, and they start questioning us about what we're doing. And we showed them the papers that we had from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs that we're allowed to be there, and it just general sort of interrogation. Nothing physical at all. So then they started checking me for the other, looking in my bag for the equipment. So the other camera I had, which was an old EOS, it was an EOS 1 back then. It wasn't even a 1D, it was just a film camera. So I thought what I'd better do is I'll just pop the back on it, and I'll just destroy the film, because if there is any evidence on there, then I'd rather that we'll get rid of it. I do that. I hand the guy the camera, and I open the back, and he pulls the film out, and he's trying to look at it against the light. So I was like, I was sad to lose the pictures, but at the same time, I was like, okay, that's good. Well, that's got us out of that one. Yeah. And I knew the other camera I had, the Contax, the film was destroyed in that. So I was like, okay, we're okay. But what I'd completely forgotten about that was Pepe had his little Sony video camera in a pouch on his hip. What's on there is all the interview and all this footage of our Hazara girls from the day before. So that's when my heart really stopped. So that we're going to be not just us, but more importantly, that family is going to. It could be really, really dangerous. But Pepe, lucky enough, was sneaky enough to be able to fast forward from where he'd been shooting that day.
So he'd realised as well.
Yeah, so he fast forwarded through it, and so when he pressed play, the screen, it just went, I think it went blue. There was just nothing on there, and he said, look, we don't have anything on this set, and they accepted that for some strange reason. So we thought, okay, we're free and clear. They gave us a sort of a good telling off, and if this happens again, then it's going to be jail. And the guy that was driving, this lovely old long white bearded guy that had been driving us with a Toyota, he didn't know where we'd gone to, and eventually he found us and showed up, and that kind of almost sort of gave us a little bit more credibility that we were with this older guy, and there is a sort of a reverence to age for sure. And so just as we're pulling out the gate, some guy walks up to the car and stops us at the barrier, and I said, oh no, they've changed their mind. And I was like, my heart, I just was was drained at that point. And the guy reached, kind of wound down the window. He spoke to the driver, and then we were let go. And I was like, okay, thank God for that. I said, what did he say? And the guy was saying, he just said, the guard had told the driver, he said, please tell your friends, I am so sorry, this is not Afghan hospitality. These people are not real Afghans. And, we profusely apologise, sort of, kind of on behalf of the real Afghan people.
Right.
And that was very much what we found there. There's this sort of juxtaposition, this sort of battle between kind of the Afghans, who are incredibly hospitable, and then the Taliban, who are sort of like, a lot of the Afghans saw them as foreigners. A lot of them had been educated in the madrasas in Pakistan, so they hadn't even really grown up in Afghanistan, and they were coming with ideas which were very, very foreign in many respects to the Afghans, especially around kind of the way you look after guests and hospitality.
So I would imagine this was time for you to pack up and leave.
It was a definite thought. We'd still got our road trip, and we'd only just got to Kabul. We hadn't even got anywhere else. So
you didn't feel spooked at all?
Oh, very much so. And when we got back to the Intercon Hotel, which is this, had been this lavish 5-star hotel, basically just had a few rooms left that they kept open for the for odd visitors. I got back there, and all the film I'd shot from the previous days, including the portrait of these Hazara girls, I'd actually, I kind of got it in the room, bags of exposed film. And I thought, if they stop us again, they're going to take the film. We could get into the same situation could arise again if they decide to process it. The thing was, I was shooting Kodak Tri-X. It was black and white, so I thought they probably might not have chemicals to process it, because probably most of the things there's no Photoshops left, but if there was anyone, if they really wanted to try hard, then maybe they would destroy it anyway by putting in C41 chemicals. Anyway, so I thought what I should do is, just to be really safe, and I don't want to lose the film, so I actually went to one of these Photoshops, which wasn't allowed to take pictures, except the only type of pictures you could take were for identity papers.
Yeah. Well, there's certainly no such thing as a morning. There's certainly no such thing as a photographic pastime in those days.
No, photography is everything was eliminated. The arts cinema was closed. You couldn't. There was no art shows. There was nothing. Society had just been stripped down to something very bare and ugly.
Yeah.
But the guy he did have a kind of a drawer full of colour film, unexposed colour film. So I bought it from him, went back to the hotel room, sealed up the bathroom door, and I basically spent the next afternoon popping the Tri-X canisters open, taking the exposed film out of the black and white canister and putting it in to the colour canister, pulling the leader out so it looked like new film it's a black and white film in a colour canister.
Espionage.
Oh my, I was going nuts at this point. I just got to tell you. Pepe and Howard were sort of in the room laughing, just thinking I'd completely lost the plot. So I was just saying, what am I going to do? So I started cutting up all the colour films. Obviously pulled all these rolls of colour film out the canisters, and I think I've got to dispose of that, because if not, they're going to wonder why I've got all this film that's all chopped up, and so I'm spending flushing it, chopping it in little bits, flushing it down the toilet, and then I think I've got the Tri-X canisters still, so I break those up and I'm lobbing those off the balcony into the bushes. And that was a sort of sense of paranoia of being there. Just after I'd finished doing that, get a knock on the door, and I was like, oh geez, what's happening now? So there's a guy. It was the clerk from the front desk in a very sort of threadbare uniform. And he said, "Oh, can
with a sink plunger, wondering what was coming through his plumbing."
Probably, what's going on?
Yeah.
But he said, "Could I come in?" And he had these sort of two blokes behind him who just were very sort of austere. And I was like, "Yeah, sure." And he could speak English. I invited him in. I said, "Oh, could you show us a couple of things on the maps?" I could see he wanted to tell me something, but I kind of needed to. Obviously, these guys who were behind him, I didn't know what their motives were. So I invited him into the room with Pepe and Howard, and he said, "Look, do you think you could come downstairs?" And I was like, "Oh no." He's sort of whispering all this stuff to me in English, and anyway, so I go downstairs with him, get to the front desk, and these kind of guys are there, and I realise they're kind of part of the team, part of the what's left of the kind of the threadbare staff. And he said, I've got to tell you something. And I was like, what's that? These people are trying to cheat you on the bill. I was absolutely shitting myself, thinking that they were like the sort of Secret Service guys or something, and I was going to get dragged off. But he was so.
I think I might have been happy to pay them the extra.
Yeah, it was just.
You've made my day.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
So I think it was pretty much at that point we all decided, okay, I think it's better we get out of Kabul.
Yeah.
Whether it's a real threats or if it's just the perceived ones were just, the paranoia was just getting really palpable.
It's incredible to someone like me who makes social photography pictures. I mean, these are stories not even of making the photographs, of which we haven't really talked a lot about so far, but just living the life of somebody on the road in some of these places that most photographers wouldn't even dare go. And wow, what?
Well, I think back then it was that was like my first foray into this stuff.
Well, this is your first foray.
I was like, okay, this is I'm not I would never admit to particularly wanting to be like a frontline bang bang person by any means, shape or form. I find this. I don't have a need for it, but I think obviously storytelling. Back to that storytelling word. There's got to be another way of.
Well, I think you've told the story very, very well so far.
The Friday Photo Walk with my guest Jason Florio today. What I enjoy so much about my conversations with photographers, and this has happened repeatedly, is that you go into a conversation with a research line of thought or perhaps ideas to talk about, and you emerge to the other side of a chat with something you weren't expecting at all. That's storytelling, to use the S word again. Well, in this next part now, Jason talks of returning to New York, where in 2001, things photographically were about to change.
1 year later, almost exactly, 2001, you're back in New York now. The story of your pictures and the day the Twin Towers fell, there's a whole episode that we recorded with that story. So what I might suggest is, if you want to hear that story with Jason, then I think it's well covered there without making you go over that ground again. But what I did want to ask, which I don't think I did in our initial conversation, is how did the world change for you post 9/11 as a photojournalist?
I think the way the world changed for me after 9/11 was it felt really small. It was so strange because about 10 days before I'd been in Afghanistan, and it was a very sort of surreal thing to suddenly think all those things that I'd been interested in that I couldn't really get any traction on. I gave the pictures to the agency, and I think the only stuff that got published were from there was a prison camp in the north of Afghanistan being controlled by the anti-Taliban commander Amir Shah Massoud, and those pictures got published, but I couldn't do much with any of the other pictures. It was very depressing.
Incredible when you consider what was about to be unleashed on the world.
Yeah, and then suddenly like everybody's going to Afghanistan, and it just sort of all the things I've been talking to my friends about, and just boring them to hell with stupid stories about getting arrested by the Taliban, that kind of thing. Suddenly people are like, oh, okay, it suddenly becomes relevant. Suddenly I think I described it before as I think my quote was, I went to Afghanistan to see a war, and there was nothing going on, and I get back to New York and the war came to me.
Yeah.
And it did sort of suddenly feel like that, the things that no one had been taking that much attention or putting much attention on. Suddenly everyone was interested in Afghanistan. Everyone was suddenly interested in Afghan culture and Wahhabism and Dahabi, everyone was sort of genning up on all the different groups and kind of what was going on in the country, and obviously things around women's education and women's rights under the Taliban. These things were suddenly getting a lot of press, which they duly deserved. But I didn't go back to Afghanistan. I was sort of sat on the sidelines, and I thought, well, I kind of just been there. I think I was pretty shell-shocked from what happened in New York, and kind of being very, very close to, possible.
But one of the towers almost fell on you.
Yeah, I mean, I was, kind of right there next to the North Tower, and the South Tower came down. And I think that still resonates to this day. I mean, I find it, the anniversary comes up, and it's still, I find myself in tears. I can't really, there was a court officer that I photographed. I think we talked about her before. And I touched base with her, and and a friend of mine, Oscar, who was there, and another friend of mine, because it was a little group of us that were very connected on that day and around that time, and kind of supported each other.
Do you remember the sounds of the... I've spoken to people who say more than anything they remember the sound of the day.
Yeah, I think definitely when the South Tower started coming down, I thought it was an explosion in the building, and then it was just... I don't know how to even describe the sound. Kind of an eruption. It was just a cacophony of... I don't know, you imagine just a massive collapsing building. But I don't remember hearing anyone shouting or sirens or any of that. It was just sort of this, sort of almost like a giant whoosh. Yeah. And I went, as we did in our previous chat, kind of ended up falling down some stairs into this World Trade Center subway station. But then after that, I remember it just being very quiet as well. Once that had happened, I think there was sort of a quietness to it until the next building came down, about half an hour later. Yeah, it's a strange thing to go back to, because it's still so palpable, but at the same time, I think because I took all the pictures in black and white, I kind of, in my mind, I go back to it in black and white, which it's strange. I don't see it in colour. I kind of, it's like the memory of it for me is through those pictures, which are black and white. Yeah.
You'll find links on the show page today to other episodes that I've made with Jason, and a film recorded in West Africa with him where he talks in more detail and shares pictures from that fateful, historic day of 2001. Actually, we're Africa bound for the next part of our conversation, after a reminder that The Extra Mile is now out, and in it this week I shoot the breeze with extra miler Andrew Hardacre. The concluding part of my conversation with him as we try to unpick what AI means to photography. It's a big topic, and I've also embedded a YouTube film on the show page today made by The Art of Photography's Ted Forbes, who takes a deeper delve into this topic. On that note, the website show notes have changed stylistically this week. You may have noticed if you've been there already. On the show page, as I want to build a more extensive reference link catalogue and video library each week that's easier to read. I hope you'll enjoy show notes version 4 something or other, always looking for ways to improve. Anyway, yes, The Extra Mile is out. We talk AI, we reach into the Extra Mile mailbag, and Mally Davis stepped out on a walk with me on Greenham Common, once the feared airbase for its 96 deployed nuclear-tipped cruise missiles, now claimed back by nature, with an emphasis encouraging bird nesting, insect life, and woodland, which is where Mally enthuses about making pictures of trees. A little of the how and why.
Yeah, it's finding the detail, what attracts you to that tree. And by doing that, it gives you the background separation as well. Here we've got a lot of tips and brush, ends of birch, ends of trees in the background that are just all very fine and work like mist and fog, if you like. So when you punch in with a telephoto, they say compression. Is it? I just mean it, to me, it brings your subject, the thing that's caught your eye, into focus. It brings that to the forefront, and then everything falls off with a shallow aperture. And that's kind of what I like doing. And I'm using the 24-200, and most of my shots have been so far between 70 and 100.
Yeah.
And here now where we are, we're looking, there's a tree in front of us. It looks like it's one of the oldest here. There's two of them actually, but there's one I'm focusing on that's limbs are like a witch's fingers pointing out into the distance, and right behind it we've got the brush. We've got that separation of wee trees, wee branches that work like mist, if you like.
Mally Davis and Andrew Hardacre on an hour's extra walk this week. Follow the link on the show page to become an extra miler if you'd like to. And my thanks sincerely too to our sponsor, mpb.com, who I've been using of late to do some winter spring clean. Does that make sense? I'm making a few changes to my own kit bag for the summer to come, so I'm trading through them right now. Not actually as I say these words, obviously, but pretty close.
For quality used and inspected photo and video kit with a 6-month guarantee upon what you buy, visit mpb.com.
So let's return to my conversation with the third of our 3 lead explorers on our expedition to the Gambia. Here's Jason as we start to understand why Africa is so captivating to those who visit for the first time, especially.
I feel, Jason, that I'm missing whole parts of your story now as I ask this next question. But from New York, I know there's Malta involved, and I suppose might touch on that because there is some relevance with that in your work in Africa. But when did the move to West Africa, and in particular the Gambia, happen?
The move to Africa, or to the Gambia specifically, was definitely over a number of years, because I first started to go there in round about 97, 98, thanks to a friend of mine, Lawrence Williams, who actually I used to skateboard with. That was kind of my...
You were a boarder?
Yes.
Oh.
Hell yeah, and I still...
I don't know why I say that with some element of surprise in my voice.
Maybe it's the grey beard and the rickety knees. But
we should get some out from your... From your garage when we get back.
Yeah, funny enough, I actually did buy a new board last year.
Did you?
There's a whole bunch of my friends who are in a certain era that are back to skateboarding, and skateboarding is very intertwined with photography. And I think there's a number of photographers who were from a skateboard background will tell you or say how skateboarding influenced them, not in the physicality of it, but definitely in the way of finding alternative ways to look at the world. Skateboarding teaches you to look at an environment in a very different way.
Yeah.
So I think it's a very good visual grounding, or a visual kind of springboard to photography in making you look at the world through kind of a slightly different set of eyes. Some people might just see a curb and a bank and don't think twice about it, but to a skateboarder you think, okay, I can do a lot of things with that.
Yeah.
Do a lot of damage on that. So Lawrence had gone to the Gambia to build what he said was going to be a backpackers camp, and I was in New York, and he'd sent me it was a text message back then. That was how long ago. It wasn't a a pager message.
Oh, pager.
Do you remember pagers?
Beep, beep,
yeah.
Beep, beep. I remember getting my first pager and thinking, I have arrived.
Yeah, I know. I remember I was very proud of my Motorola pager. Felt very, till you got to scramble for coins to get to a phone box to actually call anybody back. Yeah, cut a long story short, Lawrence said, why don't you come out to Africa? I'd never been before, didn't know anything really about it per se. He and his business partner picked me up in Mabel, their Land Rover, at Banjul Airport, which I know you know very well.
Yes.
And we basically sort of drove out the back door of the airport, which you're not on any main roads, you go straight into the bush.
Yes.
So for the next 2 weeks I was sat in the bush with them. They were sharing a little, it wasn't even a tent, they'd got like a mosquito net thing tied up in the forest, and they were telling me these grand plans of how they were going to build this kind of backpackers camp there, and etc. And I brought with me an 8x10 Deerdorf camera, or I think in England we call them 10x8s, don't we? For whatever, that's my American photography training coming in. And I just started making portraits of people that lived in this forest. It's called Makasutu, and it's considered a sacred forest. There's a number of sacred forests around West Africa that I believe have all sorts of spirits and gins and various things. Ginns. But we will soon be getting a gin if you'd like one. So we're heading to the pub. And that was my first foray into Africa, and I just fell in love with it. It was just camping out by the river.
Yeah.
They had an old motorbike, so they let me sort of strap my tripod across the handlebars, and that was it. I was just enraptured. I was only there for 2 weeks, and I got back and I remember sort of processing the 8x10 negs, all black and white Tri-X, and I'd even actually taken a Polaroid 8x10 Polaroid processor out there with me, a hand crank processor. So I did some of the early portraits were just a one-off Polaroids, just 8x10 Polaroids, and I was like, I kind of like this. And so next year, said to Lawrence, I'm coming back. He said, of course, you've always got a bed here, and for the next 10 years, and I was just every kind of once, or it's normally just once a year, kind of at the sort of dry season, I would go out there, spend a week or a month, and then I'll be back to New York, or I was traveling wherever else for assignments and stuff.
It's a place that Africa. This is. I've not travelled as extensively on the continent as you have. I've done four countries perhaps, but it's very difficult to explain how it grabs you by the short and curlies. I remember coming back from my last trip that I made in the Gambia, and this is just. I mean, it's been a few years since I last went because it was prior to COVID. And I remember Sam saying to Sam, we should take the boys out there. They'd love this place. And I described the Banjul ferry, and I described the beach with the fisher folk, and I described walking in the bush, dodging the snakes with Uncle Mo. Yeah. And Sam looked at me in horror, said, I think we'll do all-inclusive in Rhodes this year.
Which is, I was nervous as hell getting on the plane. I didn't know what the hell what was going to happen to me.
But once you've been, then you get it.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I think it's
a magical continent.
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, it's one of those, I can say, it's not one of those places. I mean, it's a vast experience of, on so many levels. And I think it's been probably my best teacher, I should think.
Really?
In so many ways. And I mean, that's a book which one day I'll never write. But yeah, I think Gambia, as far as a destination, especially as a kind of a first toe in the sand type of thing, is an amazing place. It's very giving, it's very welcoming. And
it does have its edges.
Oh, definitely, yeah. And it's as we chatted about before. I mean, during that time I was there, under the Jammeh dictatorship, it was very fraught, for sure in many ways. But I think that there was sort of a bubble of fear, and I think my first sort of 10 years or so of going backwards and forwards there and being out in the bush at Makasutu, I was a little bit protected from that because I wasn't really getting involved in any politics. I was interested in what was going on for sure, but my focus was very much about creating this body of work around Makasutu, the sacred forest, and I didn't really have a kind of a game plan for it. It was more just collecting as many portraits as possible, kind of telling a visual story. I wasn't really even collecting stories per se. I was collecting the story of Makasutu as a special place, as a sacred
place. Was this monetized, by the way?
It eventually was.
So you went out there on a bit of a wing and a prayer?
Oh, no, it went, the money I made either, working as an assistant or some of my, the paying gigs I was starting to get. That's what this all completely self-funded. I think eventually I started getting a few free flights from, there's a company called Gambia Experience who fly folks out there. And I got quite chummy with them, and they were kind enough to support my flights. I haven't had a freebie from a press flight, as they were called, for a very long time. We can actually kind of do a bit of a loop.
We're going to loop
around.
Might get noisy in a moment because there's some people working in the forest here. Are we likely to walk past them?
This is a part of a huge pipeline that Esso's putting through. I believe it's to take fuel through to Heathrow Airport.
I'm amazed that there's nobody here protesting.
Well, they've done a really good clean-up job. As we get over here, you can see what was a few months ago was a real mess of a big kind of holes and pipes and all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, you wouldn't know. There's a few caterpillar tracks in the land, but that's about it. Yeah, let's get past them and we'll continue your story. I've no idea where we were because a good few moments have passed since the last bit of the conversation we were having. I think it was skateboards and Gambia. Yeah. Two loves. I don't know. Were you a good skateboarder? I know that. I had my board, but my mum dressed me in so much protective gear. I could have been round a round table with Arthur.
Well, I would say I was like on the B team. Like I was kind of close to top of the one of the sort of up in the B team stuff.
Could you launch yourself off a ramp and do a 360?
I got pictures. I got the pictures. No, we did. No, to be honest, it was skateboarding that took me to America in the first place. And very strangely enough, a friend of mine, Justin Ashby, who was one of what they called the Brighton boys, who obviously they came from Brighton.
Doesn't sound very American.
Doesn't sound. No, they were out in California at the same time. We bumped into each other there. We drove around for about a month together. Didn't see him for about 6 years, and I'm standing in line at Gatwick Airport to go on my first trip to the Gambia, to Makasutu, and there's a guy in front of me with a surfboard, and I was like, maybe I'm in the wrong line, surfing in Africa. Again, I was very ignorant. And
there's good surf there.
Yeah, which I've later found out. And the guy turns around, looks at me, and he goes, "All right, Jace." And I'm like, "Justin." So we hadn't seen each other since the States, 6-7 years ago. And he was going to Gambia, so I thought, well, it can't be that bad. And his mum had a timeshare out there, so that there's this whole other side. I was going off into the bush, and he was going to the beach for the timeshare. So I think, as far as Gambia being a kind of a great destination for not just us photographers, but just people in general, you can get the get the bush, the beach experience. It was like, this is there's all those options. You can as we did later on in years to come with Helen, my wife, who I met in Gambia. She's not Gambian, but we both were going out there about the same time, and when we've actually I
didn't know that's where you met Helen.
Yeah, actually met at Makasutu in the sacred forest.
Right.
She was travelling independently.
There's something very poetic about that. We met in the sacred forest.
Yeah. But it took another, I think it was a good maybe 8-10 years before we actually got together.
Oh, why rush?
Why rush? I know, I'm take my time. Yeah, so when Helen and I we got together as a couple, we both had this particular love affair of Gambia, and kind of going back to the earlier question of when we actually moved there was really in 2013. We'd already made a couple of expeditions there. We'd walked the whole country by foot, so that was sort of a 6 week.
You were the first to do it, weren't you? You did a circumnavigation of the whole of the Gambia.
We did. It was 930 kilometres, and it was, again, it was one of those things about exposing yourself to a country, and we felt like walking was the best way to do it. And I think so many people who've written about walking, you open yourself up to a place because you're not kind of hermetically sealed in your SUV or anything, and I think the way people interact with you completely changes. You're not just sort of pulling into a village in a flash car, jumping out, using it as a tourist attraction. You actually sort of become part of the place. And I think sort of these expeditions, whether you do them for months or even for a few days or a week or something, it's that kind of immersion, I think, is essential as a photographer to have, to try and scrape an understanding as such. It will take years and years and years to kind of fully get into a place sometimes. But I think the quickest way is to do it by foot as such. So that was our first kind of trip together as a couple.
And it wasn't long after that you did the Source to Sea expedition, which is following the path of the River Gambia.
Yeah, the following year, yes, we went back to New York 2010, And then we were starting to get itchy feet again and thinking, okay, what can
Africa's calling.
Oh, it is. So I think we went back. I think we went back to Gambia for a little bit in that time, just to kind of go back to the forest for a few weeks, and then we thought, well, I'd had my eye on the river for a long time because Makasutu itself is on a tributary of River Gambia. They're called Belongs, and they've got these just gorgeous little rivulets that come off the main river. And Makasutu is situated on there, and I was often paddling the local canoes around there, and I was feeling kind of quite sort of Captain Sir Richard Burton in a slightly pathetic way. That kind of got my mind going, and Lawrence at Makasutu said, well, the river actually starts in Guinea, and I'm like, where's Guinea? So get the map out and realise it's about, the source of mighty River Gambia is up in the highlands of Guinea, which is about 1,100 or so kilometres away.
And it's a tiny trickle, isn't it?
It is literally a trickle from under a rock. It is one of the most, I think it was a spiritual moment for me. But it was when you know River Gambia and how vast it gets. It's up to, I think, about 13 or so kilometres wide at its widest point. It's massive. But to come from this tiny little trickle from under a rock in the highlands of Guinea is just phenomenal. Yeah, that expedition, it took a lot of preparation because we had no idea what we were doing. I paddled canoes a lot growing up on the River Thames as a kid, but nothing Africa-sized, and it was very much sort of started off in the Boy Scouts with my little fiberglass kayak type of thing. But we did Helen and I did a ton of research of when to go, what we were going to be kind of moving through culturally, who we were going to pick to go on the team with us. And I think what we learned from going back to reading Mungo Park, the great Scottish explorer who was out in the region back in the late 1700s, was to keep it small. Don't take a big retinue of people. No. So we actually picked two very old friends who were both fishermen and knew kind of the one part of the Gambia River quite well, but the next sort of 1,000 kilometres, it was unknown territory to all of us.
And we've actually, again, I'll leave some links on the show page. We've had this conversation about your River Gambia or River Gambi, as you read it on the map, your experience, and also the oyster women. We've covered that story as well. There's I'll leave some links on that, because really what I'd like to do now is turn my attention to the news about January 2024.
Before that news, we'll of course be making a programme on this expedition. The sounds of West Africa, the life experiences of those who travel with the three of us. International photojournalist Jason Florio, our river guide, Andy Thompson, a filmmaker and producer based in the Gambia, who will be mentoring on the narrative of filmmaking, which is at its very heart a photographic practice. And of course, there's yours truly. We'll be telling our story, you and I, together during the week. Whether you come with us in person or join us by the power of podcast, the smiling coast of Africa will be our destination late Jan 2024. I hope you've also enjoyed today's chance to hear more of Jason's story, one I wasn't completely across. This is now that moment, a good moment to ask more about you and your photographic story. The Photowalk editions are made by your experiences and pictures from where you live all over the world, so please be sure to keep writing in to stories@photowalk.show, stories@photowalk.show, and we'll return to the mailbag next week for your letters, your notes, your pictures. Right, back to Chobham Common for the close to this week's walk with photojournalist Jason Florio.
Here's a pub quiz for you. I know you'll know the answer to this. How many countries in the world start with the? Ooh. The Netherlands doesn't count.
Okay, what about the United Kingdom?
Well, you could have the United States, you see, because when I looked to check my facts on Google, it did have the United States, but that's not officially their title.
The Ukraine, isn't there? As
No,
well? It's not.
see, I remember having a conversation when that ghastly war started last year. I spoke to a photojournalist, and he was. It was part of the conversation. It's funny what sort of things you remember. Striking part of the conversation where he said he was a bit agitated by the sort of journalists and photojournalists going out there that still call it the Ukraine. Because it's not. It's Ukraine. Yeah.
Well,
So the.
Yes, so the Gambia actually came about, and I read this really recently because I was always told it was called the Gambia, named after the Gambia River. But there was something I'd gleaned across not so long ago, and it was actually, I think it was the first president of independent Gambia from the Brits was Sir Dawda Jawara.
Oh, so lucky to have met him.
Yeah, and you met him.
Yeah. He wasn't very well when I met him, but what a privilege to meet him.
So I believe it was Sir Dawda that was the one that put forth the idea of calling the Gambia, because he said it was getting mixed up with Zambia.
Oh.
And there was sort of this fledgling sort of tourism industry back in the day, in the sort of 60s or so. And he wanted to make sure it was defined properly, make sure people weren't booking tickets to Zambia, but they were actually booking tickets to the Gambia.
Yeah.
So it wasn't getting muddled up.
It was a PR thing.
It does. That's what I'd never heard that before. It's just one of those strange facts, like this swing. I've never seen this swing in the woods that way before.
Well, there's yes. Oh, it's a swing.
The swing.
I feel like you should sit on it, and I'll push you for a while. the Gambia, or the Gambia, and what's the other one? There's only one other officially.
The Sudan.
No.
No.
A nice sunny place.
The Maldives. No. I'm really
Well,
failing at
the
my-
Maldives is one that people suggest, but even that officially isn't the Bahamas.
Seriously.
Yeah.
I'd like to know how they. That's okay. I'm going to do a bit of Google searching when I get back. So,
well, you might prove me wrong then. But they're the two that are officially. They have the prefix of the.
Right.
Come on then, the Gambia. We're planning January 2024,
On the side or-
and it's a bit tricky to be absolutely prescriptive about it now because the planning has just started. But January 2024, there will be some dates on the show page, or I might even announce them as a voice from God, as it were, at the end of the show. But where would you go on an expedition? Whet our appetites.
In Gambia, we're talking about inside Gambia. Well, yeah, the river has always had its pull for me, and I think it's a fascinating way to maybe thread your way through the country. So you could do a little bit by land, a little bit by water, and I would do some of it by foot. We could even do donkey carts. They're one of the main modes of transport in the rural regions, along with horse-drawn. It depends on which kind of ethnic area you're in. So if you're in the kind of a Wolof enclave, then you'll see them with these gorgeous horses,
Right.
and families piled up on the carts going to the lumos, which are these fabulous. The lumos are definitely worth visiting. They're sort of weekly markets.
So, river, some of it walking.
And I think, to me, there's some of the more remote beach areas I think are fascinating. There's things that are happening along those beach areas, especially sort of the fishing spots along the way.
There's amazing, huge fishing boats that they make.
The pirogues, which are a lot of them are operated by the Senegalese or Guineans, but it's vibrant. I mean, you can't put your camera in a wrong direction. Everything is photographable, if that's such a word.
What about the people?
The biggest pull of the Gambia, what we all talk about, those of us who just keep getting pulled back there, it's the people that bring you there. I mean, there's some great scenery. It's not a country, it's not like going to Kenya where you've got kind of epic vistas and wildebeest and that sort of thing. What really is a draw to Gambia is the people. Culturally, it's diverse for the smallest country on mainland Africa. It's very diverse culturally. You can dip into a lot of different compounds that are, whether a Wolof or Mandinka or Fuller, you're going to see probably a lot of, kind of traditional activities, even though even the urban areas, I just did a long piece, it was a short film, should I say, on traditional tie-dye practices. So I found a guy who's one of the last guys using traditional dyeing techniques. So, I think there's a lot of accessibility there as well.
So are they the sort of stories that we could tell as a group?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of stories that can be kind of we could do as a group activity. I think the fishing activities are just fascinating, and we could all go off in different directions. Whether we have a local guide with us, or if you want to go off by yourself, that type of thing. There's plenty of elbow room, and then there's kind of more intimate stories that we could definitely do. Like the story I just worked on traditional tie dyeing. I think break it up with a couple of photographers. So I think there's so many opportunities there to shoot intimate stories as well as kind of the bigger stuff.
And what about in Banjul as well? Because that's it's quite a busy city. It's not as big as some African sprawling cities. It's a modest city by size, but there's lots going on to see and photograph.
The little side streets are fantastic. I mean, there's so much life and activity going on the street. It kind of reminds me of maybe something from England a long time ago in a way, really, where the kids were riding their bicycles around and there was all this activity, not many cars, and again it's a great place just to sit and hang out and not rush to take pictures. Pictures almost sort of let the pictures come to you, and inevitably people will come and chat with you. They'll ask, hey, what are you up to? Hey, do you want to come and see this? And next minute you're being dragged in someone's house.
Well, I found that very much, particularly on the ferry going over to Barra from Banjul, is that if you sit there on your own, it won't be long before you're joined by 5, 6, 7, 8 people.
Gambia is it's called the Smiling Coast, and there's definitely a reason for that, and that's why I love when I am living there, it's just on a daily basis. My interaction with my neighbours, everyone says hello to each other. There's this, and I think that's how society has remained cohesive there, even though you've got very different ethnic groups.
And during its troubles.
And during the troubles, for sure. I think it sort of humanises the way of kind of meeting and greeting each other is essential. I remember getting told off one of the first times I was there. I sort of walked into a shop and said, I need some string.
You didn't say it like that.
Well, I said left a julo, which is well, I didn't. I got that written on a piece of paper.
Oh, so you said it in there's there's Mandinka. I was going to say there's quite a few tongues there.
Exactly, and left a julo. So I need some string.
Yeah.
And then the guy sort of basically in very good English should have said, well, you didn't ask me how my day was, you didn't ask me how the family was, and gave me a whole sort of
dressing
down for sure. So, but I think for anyone, if it's a first time trip to Africa, Gambia is such a great spot.
It's the place to go for your first trip, isn't it?
Definitely, it's easygoing. There's so much to photograph. Culturally, especially. January time, you've got what's called the Kankaran Festival, which is absolutely, it's mind-blowing.
And what is that festival?
So it's a cultural festival that brings in many of the different ethnic groups, and they're sort of showcasing their traditions.
Right.
So you see Kankarans all over the place. There's a lot of kids who love making Kankaran outfits, and basically it's this big sort of shaggy suit where you can't see the person under it.
Yes.
So the traditional ones which you would see at the Kankaran Festival are they're made of tree bark and leaves and all these sort of natural elements. They're kind of the urbanized ones are actually shredded rice sacks.
Right.
But that's really colourful.
In fact, I remember going out to would it be Sanyang? And I was on the road going to it, and we stopped, I think, for a coffee, and then out of nowhere came one of these characters. And at first I was, oh my word, what's this about? But now I understand what they.
The frightening thing about them is that often these young kids are carrying massive machetes.
Yes, they were.
And for first time to Africa, I remember being at Makasutu and hearing this sort of noise come from a little bit sort of round the back of the mangroves, and Lawrence, the friend there, he said, let's go and see what's going on. It's probably a circumcision ceremony.
Right.
get there, Julie was a bunch of young boys who'd been dragged to the river to be washed after being in the bush and this whole kind of coming of age ceremony. And with them, protecting them, is this cankeran, this shredded grass suit with machetes. And he walks up to me and he starts bashing these things around my head.
That's right, yeah.
And my hairs were going up on my neck, and I was like, I've just got to Africa and I'm going to get clobbered. And then I look around and Lawrence is just behind sort of a palm tree laughing his head off.
Once I'd realised that it was actually a friendly thing that was going on, it does initially, because I don't see one of those walking down the high street in Thatcham every day.
No, and kids walking with machetes is a regular occurrence in the Gambia, but no one in their mind is thinking they're going to do anything with them other than chop a coconut down or something.
What terrific adventures to be had there. And what's the difference between... Here we go, here's a question. An expedition and a project. Because what I really want to breathe into this visit is that you're going on an expedition. It's not a series of small projects, but an expedition.
I guess an expedition to me is very much you're in movement. You're going from one place to another, maybe. So when we walked the Gambia, my initial idea was just throw the tents down wherever we got tired. And Sambali, who was I would call him our cultural liaison officer.
It's a big badge.
It's a big badge, yeah. He'd worked for the forestry department, or the agricultural department. Right. So he'd been all over the country and knew figures all over the place. And he said, look, what we have to do is meet the chief, tell him what we're coming through, and we should stay in the village just for protection. Yes, the Gambia is super safe, but he said, I think it's more interesting. You're going to get much more a sense of what the country's about. If you're just sat in the bush every night, you're not going to have those kind of interactions. No. So the first village we get to, we sort of explain our mission. I've got some letters from the government saying what we're doing, and we offer some cola nuts, which are a very important part of the process of meeting and greeting a chief. It's you do it for weddings and this type of thing. So that we took that on board. So we carried a big bag of cola nuts, and I made a portrait of the chief, pretty much like I'd been doing at Makasutu, and I had a little printer with me. I immediately made a print for him. I kept one, he kept one, put it in my little book, got him to stamp the page, because each village has a stamp.
Right.
And I was like, okay, I think this is it. This is the project. So every village we get to, we'll do kind of an official portrait. It's like, it'll be a story of traditional leadership around the country. Because the Alcalos, the chiefs, are very, very important figures in Gambian society. And they play many, many roles, and often kind of for little pay. So that was our thread. We'd make sure we get to the village in time to get the light, to do the portrait, make a print, get a stamp. Once we got a couple of them in the book, then the next village up said, your friend down the road here.
So they knew you were coming.
Yeah. And they go, we'd heard about that. Yeah. So that gave the visual thread of the journey. And for the river expedition, at first I started off doing that. And I did one at the very beginning, and I was like, you can't repeat yourself. This is boring. You've done it. Just photograph what appears. And I felt so free at that point. Yes. And I think that's the thing for people coming there. Don't have too many expectations of what you're going to get. Just let it come to you.
That's interesting. So if you go on expedition, go there knowing where you're going, having done some research, but then be free and wait for the expedition. Wait for your expedition to come to you.
Yeah. And Gambia won't disappoint. There's a story on every corner. If you're just,
yes, I know that. Yeah.
There's always some sort of activity going on. There's been times when I'm like, you get to a village and it's like, oh my God, there's nobody here. Everyone's asleep. And then suddenly, around about 4:00, everyone's up moving around. Yeah, they're not. It's like Mad Dogs and Englishmen, isn't it? People will be taking a siesta in the midday, and but early mornings, when you got nice light, mornings and evenings, there'll be loads of activity. Whether it's just the kids going down to the river to take the animals, or kicking their footballs around in that gorgeous backlit dust.
Yes.
I want to get back there already.
Well, we can't go there, but where we can go is we can go and meet Helen.
I've got to figure which way to go to the pub. I think let's try this way. I've never really walked this way. I think we come out the back of these houses here. Yeah, and Gambia's great because you can, one of my favourite things is just to go and, to go to a friend's compound, sit around the family bowl, big thing of rice and peanut sauce. It's absolutely delicious. And then if you need a bit of a break from, if you feel if you need a sort of a little touch of home, then there's plenty of great places to go and sit on the beach side and enjoy a beer, and it's all within quite a short distance of each other.
Yeah. One of my favourite memories. I think it was the most recent visit was we were sat by the beach close to your home, and I looked over my shoulder and I saw a sign that said "Beware crocodiles."
Well, that sign is actually my neighbour Pete, who lives at the back of us, whose property was the clear path into the bush to where we were sitting. The other night he sent me a video of it must have been a good 6-foot crocodile. He'd just come back from having a beer, and outside his gate
the crocodile had come back from having a beer.
Maybe it had been. Maybe it was knocking on Pete's gate.
Yeah.
But there was this bloody great crocodile because someone's built a wall in front of his place, which has basically cut the route off for the crocs, their normal route.
So they're now going through the beer garden.
Well, back into Pete's place.
Oh,
yeah. No. He's got a video of himself kind of grabbing the thing by the tail, trying to pull it in a different direction. I'm like, are you
the croc?
insane? Yes.
I tell you what, can you promise me one thing when we take this expedition? Can we miss out Pete's house?
We can miss out Pete's house, but I will take you to the sacred crocodile pool, where you can actually, and if you so inclined, you can caress one of these gorgeous beasts, and that's just 5 minutes from our house. And that's another great Gambian cultural thing, where these, we talk about the sacred forest, but there's also
but this isn't a tourist thing. This is something that the Gambians do? Or?
It wasn't a tourist thing, but it has become something that people can go to.
Right.
But it's still, again, with a lot of things in Gambia, the two live side by side. So you've got the ladies who are going to the pool, hoping that they, by dipping themselves in the water or stroking the crocodiles, will become fertile. Yes. But there's also the tourists that come, and somehow the Gambians, one doesn't really interfere with the other. It's a very it's very flexible in that respect.
Well, there's two words that you really won't hear on any other podcast in the same sentence: crocodiles and caressing.
Did I say that?
And on that note. And fertility. There was a third one in there. So if you caress the crocodile, it's fertility. Yeah. My word, this expedition could get you in a lot of trouble. Right, should we find the pub?
Yes, it's somewhere over this way.
I'm concerned.
It's amazing.
If we can't find a pub, how are we gonna navigate across the Gambia?
No idea. This is it's going to happen. We're fine. Somewhere over yonder, I can smell the horseshoes. It's just I never come around this way, but it's kind of nice to kind of come on.
And that's it for this week's show, walking with our special guest in person, Jason Florio. In a couple of weeks' time, I'll be doing a similar thing with another friend of the show, Paul Sanders, who has a mindful approach to photography, and I quote, "I believe that photography has the power to influence our perception of the world around us, building a sense of appreciation and contentment simply by taking the time to notice what's around us and how that makes us feel." Doesn't that sound like why we walk together of a Friday on this show? Now, today's show was about Jason's photographic life, as well as trying to understand his passion for a most extraordinary continent. Right now we're in the early planning stages for our expedition, with the final dates to be announced, though they will most likely be the last week in Jan, just sneaking into the first week of Feb. The weather is very favourable for us at this time of year. You'll find a page on the website under the Retreat tab, where if what you have heard sounds like the photographic adventure you would love to make, you can leave your details to be part of the team. In the meantime, back to normal, if there is such a word, next week on the show with your letters and thoughts. Our play-out song, I think it should have, and it does have, a most distinct African flavour. And I'd like to leave you with an appropriate postscript as well this week. I'm going to mix two thoughts together from two writers, Brian Jackman, the wildlife travel journalist, and Bridget Dorr. Africa changes you forever, like nowhere on earth. But how do you begin to describe its magic to someone who's never felt it. Could it be because Africa is the place of all our beginnings, the cradle of mankind, where our species first stood upright on the savannas of long ago? You can't leave Africa, Africa said. It's always with you, there inside your head. Our rivers run in currents in the swirl of your thumbprints, our drumbeats counting out your pulse, our coastline, the silhouette of your soul.